I like to say that tariffs is the most beautiful word in the dictionary to me. The tariff on this is a direct attack. Donald Trump, who changes his mind between, breakfast, mid-morning, lunch, and dinner. What the heck is going on? Why is Trump hitting his closest allies with tariffs? Why doesn't he care about affecting the stock market anymore? Does this guy even have a plan? Yes. Believe it or not, I'm here to tell you that he does. Yes. As Trump's new Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently said, President Trump's tariff policies have begun the process of changing and redefining our international economic relationships. That's right, he says. The tariffs have started the process. In other words, his trade war is just the start of a much bigger plan. A plan to tear down the entire world trade system, the same one the US built. This has only really happened twice before. Once in 1944, at the start of the Bretton Woods system, and again in the early 1980s with Reagan and Thatcher. That started the neoliberal world order, and now, here we are today. 2025 is the beginning of a whole new world order, one focused on the US, or maybe the one that comes right after all this mess, where countries are split into 3 groups. Or as Scott Bessent says, we want to make it super clear. There's a green group, a yellow group, and a red group. And we've told every country which group they're in. Some countries will get low taxes on imports, military protection, and maybe even better access to US dollars. Others will be on their own. At least that's what I learned from all the speeches and articles by Trump's closest economic advisors that I could find. So, let's get to it. What is this MAGA master plan for a new world order? And is this plan even possible? Or is it just a crazy dream, made up by someone and their friends? To answer these questions, let's first try to think like the MAGA supporters. Let's ask ourselves, what does Trump's team really want? To answer this question, let's first learn a little bit about Trump's new economic team. First, we have Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary. He's a super-rich investment fund manager who worked with George Soros to cause a big problem for the Bank of England in the early 1990s. And he used to teach economic history at Yale. Then we have Stephen Moran, Trump's new chief economic advisor. He's a Harvard business and investment expert who recently got everyone on Wall Street talking with his new article, A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. Both have written and spoken a lot about a single serious threat, the decline of manufacturing in the United States. So it makes sense that they joined Donald Trump's campaign. Their goal is to make the United States a powerful manufacturing country again, like it was a long time ago, really. Back in the 1950s, the US was a manufacturing superpower, and the value added by manufacturing was a huge 28% of total output. Today, that number is only 10%. Trump's first trade war didn't really fix this. So why is this such a big problem? The American economy is bigger than ever, isn't it? Why is Trump's team so focused on manufacturing? 2 reasons. First, the decline of manufacturing really hurt America's industrial heartland, the area that strongly supported Trump in 2024. Second, America's industrial strength is now far behind other comparable countries, especially China, which puts them at a serious disadvantage if a war breaks out, because historically factories and civilian skills have been really important for quickly building up the military. So, Trump's team thinks about China a lot. What if they invade Taiwan? Sure, the US has a more powerful navy right now. But, as Vice President J.D. Vance pointed out, America's decline in manufacturing has gotten so severe that a single government-owned company in Beijing built more commercial ships last year than all of America has built since World War II ended. So, I think from this point of view, yeah, it makes sense that the Trump administration wants to bring manufacturing back to the US. But does he really have to put tariffs on everyone at the same time and say things like this about his closest allies, saying that they are stealing our jobs, stealing our money, taking advantage of many things they've been doing over the years? They took a lot from our country, friends and enemies. And honestly, the friends have often been much worse than the enemies. After all, the US has been the most powerful country in the world for decades. They literally created the current trade system. So why are they so unhappy with it? The answer to that question involves looking at the entire time period of this chart. a short history of the US-led global order. After all, the rise of the US is a long historical trend, and happened under two specific global orders, both made by the US itself. The first is the Bretton Woods system, from 1944 to 1973. The second is the neoliberal world order, which probably lasted from the Reagan presidency in the early 80s to Trump's first term in 2016. The times in between, or how I see it, the times of change. Okay, let's start with the Bretton Woods system and why it's so important to understand Trump's plan today. The Bretton Woods system was created in the 1940s. For the economy, the rules were set in 1944 when the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference happened at Bretton Woods in the United States. At the same time, for security, many treaties were signed. These led to the creation of NATO and the US-Japan Security Treaty. I'll call all of this the Bretton Woods Economic and Security Order. Joining this order, for any country other than the United States, meant these three things. First, it would set the value of its money to the US dollar, which was connected to gold. Second, it would depend on the US for military protection, maybe even having American military bases in their country. And third, the US would help its industries become able to compete with theirs, like with the Marshall Plan, for example, and by opening its own markets while letting its recovering allies protect their markets somewhat from American companies, mostly like Besant's green, yellow, and red levels. All allies would get these benefits. Countries that weren't on either side didn't get these perks, but they could make separate deals. While communist countries were basically left out of the Bretton Woods economic system. The story of Bretton Woods is super important because even way back then, being a green country seemed like a sweet deal for those countries, and not so much for the US. But I think that's not quite right for at least three reasons. First, the US was worried about another world war, and even though they gave Europe and Japan a head start in trade, they got strong allies in return, which they really needed in the fight against communism. Second, American businesses also needed places to sell their goods overseas, which made their allies richer. The US also got richer itself. Lastly, this system made the US dollar the main currency everyone used around the world, or as French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called it, the dollar's exorbitant privilege. This special perk meant that because everyone wanted US dollars, the US could spend way more money internationally than it made without having a money problem. Giving Japan and Europe a big role in the market definitely helped them grow quickly at first. But as Stephen Moran says in this article, this system eventually caused a big problem for the US. This was called the Triffin Dilemma. See, as the world economy grew, more and more dollars were needed, but the amount of gold stayed pretty much the same. So to keep the world economy growing, the US had a choice. Keep making more dollars, which made the gold standard less reliable, or stick with the gold standard and stop the world economy from growing, which meant stopping the creation of new dollars that everyone needed. This is what led to President Nixon's famous announcement in 1971. I have directed Secretary Connally to temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, which caused a lot of economic trouble around the world. And after that, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher introduced a new world economic order called neoliberalism. This new world order, the neoliberal one, was built on a few key things. First, lower taxes on goods traded between countries. Second, fewer rules about investing money around the world. Third, letting the value of money change freely. And fourth, the US keeping everyone safe, which worked pretty well, at least according to the United States. This new system based on free markets wasn't as organized as the old Bretton Woods system. There wasn't a formal rule that said countries had to use US dollars, they just did because it was the easiest and safest money to use, but in this system, other countries had a good reason to save up lots of US dollars. It made it easier to sell things to the US, and harder for Americans to buy things from them. It's interesting that even though the World Trade Organization was all about free trade, it let developing countries charge the US higher taxes on their goods. The US thought that if it helped other countries become richer, they would become friendlier, like what happened with Germany and Japan after the war. Compared to the old system, many more countries were trading partners with the US in this new system. If a country followed the World Trade Organization's rules, it could easily sell things to American shoppers. They could also use US banks, and, as an added bonus, the US Navy protected ships carrying goods all over the world. This really seems like a great deal. But in exchange, the US got something huge. With the fixed exchange rates of Bretton Woods gone, Stephen Moran writes that the demand for American assets increased the value of the dollar, making it much stronger than it should have been for international trade. So, because exchange rates could change, the US dollar became even more powerful. A strong dollar meant the US could keep its large military all over the world, even though its economy is much smaller now than it was in the 1950s. A strong dollar also made Americans, overall, much richer. But it also made manufacturing in the US much more expensive, causing many factory jobs to move overseas, especially to China. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, which was called the China Shock. A strong dollar mostly helped Americans who were already rich, making inequality worse. Growing inequality and struggling factory towns helped elect Donald Trump, who started his first trade war in 2016. Looking back, I think this was the end of the neoliberal world order, because it ended the idea that free trade is always good. This trade war mostly focused on raising tariffs against China. However, China always fought back, meaning that in the end, China still had a higher average tariff on US goods than the US had on Chinese goods. Notably, this didn't stop the decline of US manufacturing. It also didn't stop the rise of China's powerful manufacturing industries, which now threaten to take over the entire car industry. So Biden tried something new. He tried giving lots of money to American industries just like the Chinese had done before him. This led to the building of many new factories in the US. However, according to Besant and Moran, this wasn't causing a very large US government deficit. So, here we are today, moving further and further away from the neoliberal system that the US itself created under Reagan, towards a system that kept the US as the richest and most powerful country in the world by increasing the value of the dollar. But according to Trump's team, this led to such a fast decline in manufacturing that it has now become a national security threat. Which brings us to the modern master plan for a new world order, a plan that should help bring back US manufacturing and at the same time, keep the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Because as Trump himself said, and if you want to become a developing country, lose your reserve currency. We have to have this. We can't lose it. So how do you keep reserve currency status and bring back manufacturing at the same time? Most economists think that's just not possible. But Stephen Moran wrote an article saying, yes, this can really happen. We can have our cake and eat it too. We can have our cake and eat it too. But, to be clear, Myron's article isn't a plan all by itself. It's like a cookbook with different choices. But it doesn't have a full plan, including how it works with rural areas. So, for this 3-step mega master plan I'm about to explain, I had to really study what Moran and Besant have said. I had to work really hard. And no, I wasn't accidentally added to a secret government group. So, for each step, I'll tell you exactly where I got my information. Okay, here we go. Step 1. Tariff chaos. This is what's happening right now. In this step, the government shows it means business. It doesn't care if the stock market goes down. It's not worried if the economy does badly for a little while. It puts lots of high tariffs on other countries, even friendly ones, to have more power in making deals. I'm saying this because Besant said that even though he didn't think of tariffs as a way to negotiate at first, he now uses them as a tool for making deals. My second reason for thinking this chaos is temporary is that before he joined the government, Moran said the policies he suggested would probably be used later, after the tariffs gave the government enough power to make deals. So, both Moran and Besant are basically telling us that the current tariff chaos is just to create leverage that can be used when putting the rest of the plan into action. Which brings us to step number 2, reciprocal tariffs. Remember this graph where China reacted to Trump's tariffs by raising their own tariffs? If we actually have reciprocal tariffs, that dynamic theoretically goes away. It will disappear. Look, you can keep raising your tariffs, but we'll always feel your absence. So there's always a level playing field. This is the long-term goal of tariffs, or in Besant's words, this is what tariffs are designed for. To level the playing field so that the international trading system starts rewarding ingenuity, security, the rule of law, and stability, and not wage suppression, currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, non-tariff barriers, and overly strict regulation. But here, economists have often criticized the administration for wishful thinking because, historically, trade wars like those of the 1930s only made things worse for everyone and led to war. But here, Moran said they only have the United States to sell to, there's no alternative. So they're the ones who are going to bear the brunt of these tariffs. This is a really complicated point to understand, but what he essentially means is that, since everyone wants to export to the US to get dollars, the US has a truly unique bargaining position in the trade war. Trump's first trade war failed because China simply increased exports to countries like Mexico and Vietnam, which are then exported to the US. So, Moran writes that President Trump sees tariffs on everyone as a way to get better deals. It's easier to think that after some tough tariffs, places like Europe and China would be more willing to make a money deal in exchange for lower tariffs. A money deal. That's right. This brings us to the last part of the big master plan. Stage 3, the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Yes, the Mar-a-Lago Accords, which will be as famous as the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 or the Plaza Accord of 1985, where Japan, the US, and European countries agreed to make the Japanese yen and European currencies worth more compared to the dollar. But what does this have to do with Besant's green, yellow, and red groups? Myron didn't talk much about this Mar-a-Lago Accord after he joined the Trump administration, which makes sense because he doesn't want to say too much. But he did tell us that if the dollar could go down in value to make trade more equal, then we wouldn't have as many trade problems. So we wouldn't have many of the issues that tariffs and other policies are trying to fix, because things the US makes would be easier to sell around the world and other countries wouldn't be able to take advantage of us as much. So I think they can't talk about this as much as they used to so they don't mess up the deal making. But the main goal is still to make the dollar weaker, while still keeping it as the main world currency. In his article, Moran talked about some wild ideas the US could use to do this on their own, like charging a fee to those who use the dollar as the main currency. But I think they won't pick those ideas because it would be too risky. Instead, I think the Mar-a-Lago agreements, which Trump's team will eventually push for, will look a lot like the Bretton Woods system, only without being tied to gold. I can even imagine that in this new world order, the green countries will link their currencies to the dollar, with a deal that, whenever the dollar gets too strong, they will increase the value of their currencies against it. In return, they get access to the biggest consumer market in the world, as well as safety benefits and good access to the US dollar system. But unlike Bretton Woods, I predict the US will charge a fee for this protection, basically making them like states that depend on the US. Yes, this is just my guess. But listen to this recent speech by Besant, and please tell me if you hear the things I just talked about. The international trade system is a network of military, economic, and political relationships. You can't separate any single part. This is how President Trump sees the world, not as a winner-take-all game, but as connected parts that can be moved around to help the American people. And that's why I think Trump's current economic turmoil makes sense. Trump's team believes the current global setup isn't good for Americans anymore. They've already told us that all this tariff trouble is just a way to get a better deal. They've told us they plan to use tariffs on everyone to make things fair for the red and yellow countries. And they've said that if everyone can agree on currencies, tariffs can be much lower. And yeah, I think if enough countries join the new MAGA world order as green countries and link their money to the US dollar, it really does mean Trump can have a weaker dollar but still keep it as the world's main currency. This could help bring factory jobs back to the US, at least a little in theory. But of course, all of this depends on the US making it worthwhile for countries to become a green country in the new MAGA world order. I think this is the real issue with the plans of people like Myron. They're obviously smart, they know a lot about history. But to agree to make your money worth less than the dollar, to keep relying on the US military but now pay for it, That basically makes you a puppet state, like a helper to a big powerful country. Trusting the US that much is a really big ask. Trust the US like many countries trusted the Bretton Woods Agreement, or like when they agreed to Reagan's Plaza Accord in 1985. But if you rip up a trade agreement you signed, like the one with Canada and Mexico, or if you threaten to take over your closest ally, or land controlled by one of your most loyal European allies, how can you expect other countries to want to join your new MAGA economic and security plan? And if nobody joins your new economic plan, then you have to make a choice. Either give up the dollar's status as the world's main currency, and the riches and power that come with it, or keep the dollar and its power, and accept that you need to depend on factories in Mexico, Europe, and Japan. But hey, that's just what I think. There's definitely a lot more to talk about, and the last part was a little bit of a guess for sure. But I hope it gave you some good hints about how Trump's economic advisors see the world and what they'll probably tell Trump to do next. Now, if you want to learn more about Scott Bessent's ideas about international trade, I suggest you read his article in The Economist, which is in this video's description. And if you're interested in a different idea that agrees that the current global system isn't working, but says that you don't need tariffs to fix it, also read this article by two of Biden's former advisors in The Economist. Actually, if you want to get the best overall view of these fast-changing economic times, I really suggest you use the link below to get a year of The Economist for 20% less. Whether you like to read the paper version with some coffee or the digital weekly version, you'll always know what's going on in the world, no matter where you are.